Episode of Full of Useless Information. My name is Beth Bond, and I am the curator of Sustainable News. Let me see if I can get us turned around. There we go. How is everyone tonight? Trying a new setup to see if I'll be able to read things easier. Welcome. As people come in, I will try to. I'm trying to salsa. Okay, I'm not going to read that whole name out, but that's very interesting and unique. Tonight we're going to be talking about COP21, which is happening in Paris, and Greenbuild, which I just got back. Well, I mean, had Thanksgiving first, but in between, but just got back from Greenbuild, which is in Washington, D.C. About 2 weeks ago, and carbon tax, which is, I guess it's sort of going to be a rant tonight because this whole idea of carbon tax, but the title of this scope is what do carbon tax, COP21, and Greenbuild all have in common? And of course, all of these issues are happening concurrently to discuss how we get to a more sustainable future. Thanks for the hearts. Anyone coming in, if you want to tap me some hearts to let me know that I'm talking about something that's relevant to you, that would be great. I know this is sort of a big, deep discussion, but there's so much going on right now for sustainability and to help reduce carbon. I just thought it was really important to talk about it since I am actually honored to have lots of colleagues in Paris right now at the COP21. So for those of you who don't know, COP21 is the climate, I can't remember the name, but it's basically a UN climate hearing that's happening in Paris. It's 2 weeks. There's been a lot of national news about it because 150 leaders from 150 countries are there discussing climate, but I don't think that people realize how big the climate talks are. It's not just simply 150 leaders who are there. There are people from all over the world, from all over different areas of sustainability there to discuss. We are currently, hey, how are you? I was hoping that I could read this sitting this far away because I have adjusted my long distance viewing, but unfortunately I can't see it. Anybody has a question for me, I'll really try to answer it, but if not, go on and shoot out a question on Periscope, and I will go and follow up with you on Twitter after this is done. So let me get back on topic. As we were discussing, the COP21 is happening over in Paris. It's a 2-week process. It started off with national leaders, but it also started off with some pretty major announcements that are pretty exciting, which is Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos, and there was another guy that I didn't recognize, have made an announcement that they're going to be investing money into solving climate change, which is really exciting. There are so many people over there covering it. We've got an Emory student who's blogging that we've been posting her stuff. I've made it really easy for you to find articles on Southeast Green. If you go to www.southeastgreen.com, the second button over in the nav section says COP21. We have over 20 articles from people. The United Methodist Church, which I am a member of, and know the Director of Environmental Justice is there. His name is John Hill. They are posting videos, and it turns out that there is a huge faith-based group there at COP21. Methodists, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, and UCC, which is United Church of Christ, I believe. They are all there. There are, of course, activists, which we heard about on Sunday, who were in the Republic. One of the sort of side things that happened from the terrorist attacks in Paris, which, quite frankly, at least everyone's safe, is that they canceled all the public marches, and there were supposed to be thousands and thousands of people there marching to get the world to act on climate change. Ironically, the first day they opened, both Delhi and Beijing were in critical ozone. So climate change is something that everyone's dealing with, and I'll go a little bit more deeper on how we're seeing climate change affect the world. But, Delhi, and India, and China have been sort of lagging their feet along with, yes, please ask me something. Anyway, China and New Delhi and India have been dragging their feet because the U.S. is not taking leadership because we can't get anything passed with our current Congress, even though President Obama is over there. So that is funny, but we are not going to deal with spammers. Let me just block this person real quick. Okay, so my age is not important. So anyway, so the reports that we're getting from Paris is that people are feeling very hopeful. It's been 6 years since we've had a climate congregation like this. The last one was in Copenhagen, and it sort of fizzled out, and it didn't do anything. But in those 6 years, as people know, we have been experiencing a lot of challenges with climate change. We've had Sandy since then. We've had devastating droughts. We've had devastating tidal rise. There was an article in the New York Times today about the Marshall Islands are now disappearing from climate change. From sea level rise, which is, of course, caused by the heating planet, which is heating Antarctica and in particular Greenland and the Arctic at alarming rates. They're already experiencing sea level rise changes along the northeast coast, and we recently had what they call a king high tide in Tybee Island. I'm based out of Atlanta, and we had a king tide, which is sort of like a super high tide, and actually the highway Tybee Island is a barrier island off the coast of Savannah, Georgia, and it was completely flooded during a king tide, and they said it had never been flooded before during a king tide. And that the reason we're having these issues now is because of sea level rise. And of course, Florida is already experiencing it. And we, for those of you who don't know about Southeast Green, we're the largest online news site in the Southeast. And we interviewed a professor who is studying the effects of sea level rise in Florida. So that's what COP21 is, this sort of international conglomeration with hundreds, not just 150 leaders, but hundreds of people getting together, trying to come up with a plan to mitigate, what we're doing to the climate. And I think the facts are in that we know what we have to do. In other words, we can't go hot. We can't raise the Earth's temperature more than 2 degrees Celsius, or we're in big trouble. I'm not going to debate the climate deniers. For those of us who are pragmatic and listening to the scientists and seeing with our own eyes, I think most of the pragmatic world agrees that there is climate change. So that's what they're doing, is they're saying, okay, we need to do this, and how are we going to do it? And, the faith-based communities are there, hey, we can do this, but we need to make it just. We need it, and not only do we need to make it just, we need to make it just to mitigate climate change, because the people who are going to be most affected by climate change are those who are the least prepared to fight climate change. So there's already discussion that there'll be 27 million refugees in Bangladesh alone from rising river levels. And so what do you do with 27.5 million people who've... Sorry, I just lost my microphone. Hold on one second. Okay, just lost my microphone. Thanks for the hearts. So, everyone right now is really concerned about Syrian refugees and what are we going to do about those, and we're looking at, numbers around the 100,000s. But think about, rivers becoming so high that people lose their livelihood around rivers and they cannot live, and so they move. What do you do with 27.5 million? A lot of people are not aware, but over in the Pacific, like we were talking about the Marshall Islands earlier, there are other islands that have already... Good. That's great. The Marshall Islands are flooding, but there's other islands that have already been evacuated due to sea level rise. And, some of the more progressive countries and first world countries, I hate that word, first world, but there's a word for it, but I can't remember what it is. Anyway, they have taken these climate refugees is what they're calling them, but, legitimately no one can take 27.5 million climate refugees. And even some of the numbers that are happening now, New Zealand has been saying, Bangladesh has had millions of people displaced due to sea level rise, and it's continuing. And so, these are the things that they're talking about COP21. So I want to tie this back into Greenbuild. So Greenbuild is, of course, the National Green Building Trade Show hosted by United States Green Building Council. And, you go there and you learn about all the great ways that you can build things greener and more energy efficiency. That's really where the heart of green building started with, was being more energy efficient to reduce our impact on the earth. And things, that have been added to it are things like water conservation and, materials that don't make us sick in regards to the toxins in them and as they off-gas. So was very honored to be there, hosted by Mohawk. Let me go around and do what I do, which is tweet and, post and shoot video. And, it's very interesting because now you're starting to hear about, in the green building, and this is the second time I've been to Greenbuild, what do we do with, housing people in a more sustainable, but more importantly, a more just and more fair way? And how do we get more out of our buildings? How do we maximize the space while minimizing the footprint? So, and footprint can be actual space. So that was really interesting, which leads to one of the strategies that I'm sure they'll be discussing in Paris, and one of the strategies that was being discussed in Greenbuild, which unfortunately is a no-go here in the Southeast, and I would say also the Midwest of the United States, which is a carbon tax. Now, the idea of a carbon tax is basically, if you emit carbon, and you are everything I've seen is, if you emit carbon and you are a company or a business, you will pay, quote unquote, a carbon tax. So basically, big industry which emits the most carbon would be hit the hardest, as they are pushed to find better ways with least carbon. Thank you so much for all the hearts. I appreciate it. They find the least amount of waste. So I'm going to just say you are a cement company. I just want to give you an idea of what this looks like. You are a cement company. Cement companies, actually the big ones that create the cement for roads and things like that, are one of the highest carbon polluters because of the process and the industrial and energy intensive use it creates. So those guys would start paying a quote unquote tax for the carbon they emitted, hoping that by having to pay this tax, they would find a way to actually become more efficient. The argument, of course, is, well, if you tax us, we'll just raise our rates for everybody else, which is silly because anytime they do anything that causes them to raise their rates, they pass the rates on. So to me, that argument of like, well, if you tax us, we'll just turn around and raise our rates, is sort of silly, because they have to raise their rates regardless of whether there's a tax or whether the cost of goods go up or the cost of production goes up, or if the cost of employees go up. So threatening to say, well, we're just going to pass it along to the consumer, to me is sort of a disingenuous argument. But the second thing is nobody likes the word tax, especially here in the United States and especially in the Southeast. And so finding another way to structure this conversation. The folks out on the West Coast at Greenbuild were very, 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 we're going to do a tax. We're going to do a tax. And I think that's great, because in California they can do a carbon tax, but there are 49 other states. And I think that we need to find a national solution to this, not just a solution for California, because as we all know, not only is the globe connected economically, where if catastrophic things happen in one part of the globe economically, it affects everybody else, but also we all know that climate change is also totally connected to everything else. So using a carbon tax is probably not a way. I sort of like the incentive structure. Basically, you are incentivized to mitigate your carbon by getting tax deductions. And we found in the coverage at Southeast Green that the corporations, if they are incentivized to do something, they will do it. So I would really like, and I hope that they will come out of COP21 and say, hey, instead of punishing people for their carbon, let's incentivize them to reduce their carbon. And I think it's a more positive way. It's definitely a carrot approach instead of a stick approach. And I think that will be much more helpful, and I think that'll make people feel a lot better about what they're doing. And the second thing is that I want to address, once again, it's all about language, right? It's all about communication. So the President Obama has said they do not want a treaty coming out of COP21 because the treaty would never pass in Congress, so that means the U.S. could never be a part of it. So the one thing that I think is they're talking about is something that would not be binding legally. But I also think that, all corporations are now national players, international players. So corporations, let's take Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is based here in Atlanta, but they have headquarters all over the world, They're international. And so internationally, they know that carbon is a problem, and water for them is a really big issue because all their products are water-based. And so finding a solution coming out of COP21 is really important. Thanks for those of us who are joining late. If you want to see the whole thing, you can do the replay. We've just been talking about carbon tax and COP21 and what that means, and Greenbuild, and how all of those sort of subjects play together. So anyway, I hope that you will share this. I never ask people to share this until the end, but if you enjoyed this, or you think it's valuable, or you think it's important for people to know what's going on, please feel free to share this via Twitter, Facebook, or even with your folks in Periscope. And thanks so much for the hearts. And I hope this has sort of helped explain what's going on and how some of the solutions might turn about. This is Beth Bond signing out with Southeast Green. Remember, Southeast Green is available www.southeastgreen.com 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Thanks so much.